The mop bucket wheels squeaked against the marble floor as Roy Bennett pushed it down the darkened hallway. Most people avoided the east wing of the Imperial Palace. The dragon nobles called it the Wing of Shame, where failures were stored and forgotten. Roy called it his Tuesday route that he had been cleaning these halls for 8 years now. The job paid enough to keep a small apartment in the human quarter and put food on the table. After losing everything in the Titan Station mining collapse, Roy learned not to ask for much from life. Just steady work and a quiet place to sleep. The hallway curved ahead, lined with doors that nobody opened anymore. Dust gathered in the corners despite his weekly rounds. The crystal lamps that made the rest of the palace shine like captured starlight were dark here. Roy used his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the floor to check for debris. Something moved in the shadows. Roy stopped pushing his cart. He pointed the flashlight toward the library entrance at the end of the hall. The door hung half open, which was odd because he always closed it after cleaning. Through the gap, he could see scattered books on the floor that he approached carefully. The library was supposed to be empty. Everyone knew that. It had been sealed off after the prince who used it was disgraced. Roy had special permission to clean it once a month, but nobody ever went inside otherwise. The flashlight beam caught something large sprawled on the floor between two fallen bookshelves. Wings. Massive wings that dragged behind a figure reaching desperately toward a high shelf. The wings were twisted at wrong angles, the membranes torn and scarred. Roy recognized what he was seeing. A dragon. One of the imperial family. And from the way those wings looked, one who could no longer fly. The dragon's hand stretched upward, claws scraping against the wooden shelf but coming up short. A thick book with gold lettering sat just beyond reach. The dragon made a sound, half growl and half sob, before collapsing against the floor. Roy set down his flashlight and walked over. He reached up without saying anything and pulled the book from the shelf. The cover read Ancient Techniques of Wing Restoration, in both dragon script and common language. The dragon's head snapped around. Eyes like molten gold stared at Roy with shock and something close to fear. He was young for a dragon, probably not much older than a human teenager. His scales were deep blue, almost black in the dim light. The broken wings trembled as he pulled them closer to his body. "You should not be here," the dragon said. His voice was rough, like he had not used it in a long time. "Leave. Forget you saw anything." Roy held out the book. "You were trying to get this." The dragon stared at the book, then at Roy. "I said leave. I heard you." Roy set the book down within easy reach. "But you look like you needed help. I need nothing from a human janitor." The words came out harsh, but there was no real anger behind them. Just exhaustion. Roy shrugged. He picked up one of the fallen books and placed it back on a lower shelf. Then another. The dragon watched him in silence, confused by what was happening. "What are you doing?" the dragon finally asked. "Cleaning. It's my job." Roy gathered 3 more books. "This is my route. This wing is closed. Forbidden. You should not even have access. Maintenance staff go everywhere." Roy straightened a tilted shelf, even places other people forget about. The dragon pulled the book closer to himself, protective. "You will report this. Tell the court that the failure prince still lives in the Forgotten Wing. They will find it amusing." Roy stopped and looked at him directly. "Why would I do that?" "Because that is what people do. They see weakness and they tell others. They laugh. They point." The dragon's claws dug into the book's cover. "That is how courts work. How empires work. Maybe in palaces." Roy picked up his flashlight. "In the mining colonies where I'm from, people who fell down got helped back up. That's how we survived." The dragon said nothing. He seemed to be waiting for the trick, the cruel joke that would come next. Roy returned to his cleaning cart and pulled out a small package wrapped in cloth. He walked back and set it beside the dragon. "That's antibacterial gel and clean bandages. Your wings have open tears. Infection will make things worse." "Why?" The dragon's voice cracked slightly. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Roy thought about his daughter. About how the mining company abandoned the workers after the accident. About how everyone looked away when people needed help because it was easier than getting involved. He thought about all of that and felt tired. "Because somebody should," Roy said simply. He picked up his mop and bucket. I clean this section every Tuesday. If you need anything, I'll be around." He left the library, pulling the door halfway, closed behind him. The dragon sat in the darkness, holding a book about healing wings and a package of medical supplies, trying to understand what just happened in a tower high above the Forgotten Wing. Emperor Sethian watched a video feed from the library's hidden security crystal. He had been monitoring his seventh son for months, watching Aldrich slowly give up on life. The Emperor's face revealed nothing as he watched the human janitor leave. "Interesting," Sethian said to the empty room that he rewound the feed and watched it again. The human had not hesitated, had not asked permission or looked for reward. He simply helped because someone needed it. Such behavior made no sense according to dragon philosophy. Strength came from dominance. Loyalty came from power. Kindness without benefit was illogical. The Emperor watched the recording a third time. The human's name appeared on the personnel file. Roy Bennett, Maintenance Division, 8 years of service, no disciplinary issues. A completely unremarkable record. Yet he had just done something remarkable without even realizing it. Sethian made a note in his personal log. He would watch this human more closely. Perhaps there was something to learn here. Perhaps the old ways were not the only ways that in the library below. Aldrich opened the book with shaking hands and began to read. For the first time in 6 months, something other than despair filled his chest. It was small and fragile, barely there at all, but it felt like hope. Emperor Sethian had ruled for 300 years. In all that time, he had learned to recognize patterns. Power sought power. Weakness attracted predators. Loyalty followed strength. These were the fundamental laws that held empires together. The human janitor broke every single one of them. Sethian watched through the observation crystals as Roy returned to the East Wing the following Tuesday. The human carried his usual cleaning supplies, but also a small bag that had not been part of his equipment before. He knocked on the library door before entering, which struck the Emperor as oddly polite given the circumstances. Inside the library, Aldrich had moved to a corner where he had built a nest of sorts from torn cushions and old curtains. The book on wing restoration lay open beside him, pages marked with strips of cloth. He looked up when Roy entered, surprise crossing his face. "You came back," Aldrich said. "Told you I would." Roy set down his cleaning supplies and opened the extra bag. Brought some things that might help. He pulled out elastic bands, lightweight wooden dowels, and what looked like climbing rope. Aldrich stared at the collection with confusion. "What is this supposed to be?" "Physical therapy equipment. Modified for your size." Roy held up one of the elastic bands. "In the mines, when someone got injured, we couldn't always afford fancy medical gear. We improvised, built things that helped people recover. My wings are shattered. No amount of elastic will fix them." Aldrich's voice carried bitterness earned through months of pain. "Maybe not, but staying still definitely won't fix them." Roy approached carefully, keeping his movements slow. "That book you were reading mentioned exercises. Small movements to prevent the muscles from dying completely. These can help with that." Aldrich looked at the equipment, then at Roy. "Why are you doing this?" "Already told you. Because somebody should." "That is not an answer. That is an excuse." The dragon's tail lashed in frustration. "Humans always want something. Payment. Status. Favor. What do you want from me?" Roy sat down on an old bench, which creaked under his weight. He was quiet for a long moment, thinking about how to explain something he had never fully put into words. "I had a daughter once," Roy said finally. "Sarah. She worked in the mines with me on Titan Station. Good kid. Smart. Careful. Did everything right." Aldrich went still, listening. "There was an accident. Structural collapse. The company knew about the weak support beams for months, but never fixed them. Figured it was cheaper to pay death benefits than upgrade the equipment." Roy's hands clenched. "Sarah got trapped. She was alive when I found her. Alive but pinned under 3 tons of rock." "I'm sorry," Aldrich said quietly. "I tried to get help. Called for the emergency teams. They said it would take 6 hours to dig her out properly. She didn't have 6 hours." Roy looked at the floor. "So I tried to move the rocks myself. Bare hands. Other miners joined in. We worked until our hands bled. It wasn't enough. She died while we were still digging. The library fell silent except for the distant sounds of the palace beyond the walls. After that, the company offered me a settlement. Told me to move on, find new work. They made it clear that no one would hire a troublemaker who spoke up about the accident. So I took their money and came here. Started over. Roy met Aldrich's eyes. But I made myself a promise. If I ever saw someone who needed help again, someone everyone else had given up on, I wouldn't walk away. Not again. Aldrich's wings shifted slightly. I'm not your daughter. No, you're not. But you're someone who needs help. And I can give it. That's enough. The dragon studied Roy for a long time. Something in his expression softened. Your daughter would be proud of you. Maybe. Or maybe she'd think I'm a fool for getting involved in dragon politics. Roy stood and picked up the elastic bands. Either way, I'm here. Question is, do you want to try? Aldrich looked at his broken wings, then at the simple equipment Roy brought. The rational part of his mind said this was pointless. Dragon wings required advanced healing technology and months of treatment in proper medical facilities. Elastic bands and rope were children's toys compared to that. But another part of him, the part that had been slowly dying in this forgotten library, whispered that maybe trying was better than giving up. Show me what to do, Aldrich said. Roy smiled. It was the first real smile Aldrich had seen in half a year. They started with basic movements. Roy tied the elastic bands to support Aldrich's wings in neutral positions, taking pressure off the damaged joints. Then slow stretches, barely perceptible movements that made the dragon grimace with pain. Not too much, Roy said. Little bit each day. Your body will tell you when to stop. My body is telling me to stop now. Aldrich growled through gritted teeth. That's pain talking. Different from damage. You learn to tell the difference. Roy adjusted one of the bands. In the mines, we had to know our limits. Push too hard, you hurt yourself worse. Don't push at all, you waste away. Finding the middle ground is the trick. They worked for an hour. When they finished, Aldrich was exhausted but somehow felt better than he had in months. The exercises hurt, but they hurt in a way that felt productive rather than destructive. Roy packed up his equipment but left the bands and dowels behind. Practice these twice a day, not more. Your muscles need time to recover between sessions. You will return. Aldrich asked. Every Tuesday. Maybe more often if I can arrange it. Roy picked up his mop bucket. In the meantime, there's someone I want you to meet. Another human who works in the palace. Her name is Diana. She's a cook in the kitchens. I think she can help with your nutrition. You're recruiting others into this. Aldrich's eyes widened. That is dangerous. The court will notice. My brother will notice. Let them notice. Roy headed for the door. You're not doing anything wrong. Neither am I. We're just two people having conversations and doing exercises. Nothing illegal about that. After Roy left, Aldrich sat alone with the therapy equipment. He looked at his wings and felt something he thought had died with his ability to fly. Determination. Maybe this human was crazy. Maybe this would all end in failure and more pain. But maybe, just maybe it wouldn't. High in his tower, Emperor Sethian made another note in his log. The human had shared a personal tragedy to build connection with Aldrich. This was emotional manipulation, a tactic the Emperor understood. But the way Roy spoke suggested he genuinely believed what he said. There was no calculation behind his words, no hidden agenda. Sethian pulled up Roy's personnel file again, expanded the search, found records from Titan Station. The mining accident was real. The daughter was real. Everything Roy had said checked out. The Emperor sat back in his chair, troubled by thoughts that had not occurred to him in decades. What if strength was not always about power? What if loyalty could exist without dominance? What if the old ways were incomplete? He watched Aldrich attempt the exercises on his own, struggling but persisting. His seventh son, whom he had abandoned to preserve tradition, whom he had watched suffer in silence, because that was what honor demanded. Sethian closed the observation feed and stared at his own reflection in the dark crystal. 300 years of rule, and a simple janitor was teaching him things he should have known all along. Diana Cole had worked in the palace kitchens for 12 years. She knew which nobles liked their meat rare, which ones avoided spices, and which ones would send back a dish just to feel powerful. Dragons were particular about their food, and a good cook learned to read moods as well as recipes that So when Roy Bennett approached her with a strange request, she knew immediately that something unusual was happening. High-protein meals. Diana wiped flour from her hands. How high are we talking? Enough to help rebuild muscle tissue. Someone who's been inactive for a long time and needs to recover strength. Roy kept his voice low. The kitchens were always busy, always full of ears. Can you do that? Diana studied him. Roy was one of the quiet ones, the workers who did their jobs and went home without drama. She had never known him to ask for special favors. Does someone have a name? She asked. Better if you don't know yet. Roy glanced around the kitchen. Can you help or not? Diana thought about it. Special meal requests could get complicated. If this involved noble family politics, it could be dangerous. But Roy's expression was serious in a way that made her curious. I could prepare something. When do you need it? Every Tuesday to start. Maybe more later. Roy handed her a folded piece of paper. These are the dietary needs. I wrote down everything I could find about dragon nutrition. Diana unfolded the paper and her eyes went wide. Dragon nutrition, not human. This was about one of the imperial family. She looked at Roy with new understanding. You're helping one of them, she said quietly. I'm helping someone who needs it. That's all you need to know for now. Roy met her eyes. Are you in or out? Diana folded the paper and tucked it into her apron pocket. I'm in, but you're going to tell me the full story eventually. Deal. Over the following weeks, Diana prepared special meals that Roy smuggled out of the kitchen in sealed containers. She didn't ask questions, just made sure the food was nutritious and carefully portioned. Other kitchen workers noticed, but said nothing. Diana had a reputation as someone you didn't cross. Meanwhile, in the forgotten library, Aldrich's condition slowly improved. The exercises Roy designed were crude compared to proper medical treatment, but they worked. Aldrich's wings grew stronger. The pain became more manageable. Small movements that had been impossible a month ago now came easier. Roy brought new equipment each week. He consulted with Aldrich about what hurt and what helped, adjusting the exercises based on feedback. It was trial and error, but progress was progress. One Tuesday, Roy arrived to find someone else in the library. An elderly dragon with silver scales and tired eyes sat across from Aldrich, examining his wings with professional interest. This is Master Fong, Aldrich said quickly, seeing Roy's concerned expression. He's a physician. Was a physician. He worked in the palace medical wing until he questioned some traditional treatments. Now he works in the lower levels. Master Fong looked at Roy with curiosity. You are the human janitor, the one who brought these. He gestured at the therapy equipment scattered around the room. Ingenious. Primitive, but ingenious. You understand leverage and gradual resistance. Where did you learn this? Mining colonies. We had to improvise a lot. Roy set down the meal container he brought. Is there a problem? Problem? No. I am impressed. Master Fong turned back to Aldrich's wings. The approach is unorthodox, but effective. However, I believe we could do better. I have access to certain texts, certain techniques that were banned by the Imperial Medical Council. Banned what? Aldrich asked. Because they were considered too dangerous, too unpredictable. Master Fong pulled out a small book from his robes. This technique could fully heal your wings, restore them to their original strength, perhaps even make them stronger. But the process is excruciating and carries significant risk. If your body rejects the treatment, it could kill you. The library went silent. Aldrich stared at the book like it might explode. How significant is the risk? Roy asked. 20% mortality rate based on historical records. The treatment takes 7 days. Each day brings worse pain than the last. Most subjects give up and beg for it to stop. Master Fong looked at Aldrich seriously. But those who survive emerge fully healed. It is the only way to repair damage as severe as yours. Aldrich's claws dug into the floor. 7 days of agony with a 1 in 5 chance of death. Those are my options. Or continue as you are, slowly improving but never truly flying again. Master Fong closed the book. The choice is yours, young prince. I merely present the possibility. Roy watched Aldrich's face. He saw fear there, but also hunger. The hunger of someone who had lost something precious and would risk anything to get it back. I need to think about this, Aldrich said. Master Feng nodded and stood to leave. As he passed Roy, he paused. You have done something remarkable, human. You have given him hope. That is often the hardest part of healing. The rest is just pain and time. After the old dragon left, Roy and Aldrich sat in silence. Diana's meal sat forgotten on a nearby table. What do you think I should do? Aldrich finally asked. Roy considered the question carefully. I think you should do what you believe is right. Not what I think. Not what anyone else thinks. This is your body, your life, your decision. That is not helpful advice. Maybe not, but it's honest. Roy stood and walked to the window. Beyond the dusty glass, the palace courtyard bustled with activity. Dragons flew overhead, their wings catching the sunlight. I can tell you what I'd do in your place. I'd try the treatment. I'd take the risk. Because living half a life when a full one is possible would eat at me every single day. But I'm not you. Aldrich looked at his wings, spreading them slightly. They moved better than they had months ago, but the scars remained. The twisted bones. The torn membranes. He would never truly fly with them as they were. If I die during the treatment, what happens to you? Aldrich asked. What do you mean? The court. My brother. They will blame you. Say you killed me with your interference. Aldrich's voice was firm. You could be executed. Roy shrugged. Then I better make sure you don't die. You say that like it is simple. It's not simple, but it's worth doing. Roy turned back from the window. I've already lost one person I cared about because I wasn't strong enough to save them. I'm not losing another. If you decide to try this treatment, I'll be there. Every single day, every single hour if needed. You won't face it alone. Something broke in Aldrich's expression. A wall he had built to protect himself from more disappointment crumbled. I barely know you. You owe me nothing. Yet you speak like we are family. Maybe we are. Not by blood, but by choice. Roy picked up the meal container and handed it to Aldrich. Eat. You'll need your strength whether you choose the treatment or not. Aldrich took the container with shaking hands. I want to try it. The treatment. I want my wings back. I want to fly again. Then we'll make it happen. Roy said it with such certainty that Aldrich almost believed it was possible. In his observation tower, Emperor Sethian watched the conversation through the crystal feed. He heard every word, saw the bond forming between his son and this human janitor. Part of him wanted to intervene, to stop this before it went too far. The treatment Master Feng mentioned was forbidden for good reason. Many had died attempting it. But another part of him, a part he thought had died long ago, wanted to see what would happen. Wanted to see if this human's stubborn faith could overcome centuries of dragon tradition that said some things were impossible. Sethian made a decision. He would not interfere. Not yet. But he would watch closely. And if his son died because of this human's influence, there would be consequences. If his son lived and flew again, there would be different consequences. Either way, the empire was about to change. The emperor just wasn't sure if that change would save them or destroy them. The treatment began on a Tuesday morning. Master Feng arrived with leather bags full of herbs, crystals, and instruments that looked more like torture devices than medical equipment. Diana came too, insisting that if they were going through with this insanity, someone with actual medical training should be present. I was a field medic before I became a cook, she explained while setting up her supplies. Figured those skills might come in handy again. Roy had taken a week of vacation time he had been saving. He told his supervisor he had family business. It wasn't entirely a lie. Aldrich had become family in a way that mattered more than blood. This will hurt, Master Feng said as he prepared the first injection. Not immediately, but within the hour. By tonight, you will beg us to stop. By day 3, you will curse us. By day 5, you may lose consciousness entirely. If you survive to day 7, the treatment will be complete. Aldrich lay on a makeshift bed they had constructed from cushions and blankets. His wings were spread out, pinned in position by a frame Roy had built for metal pipes. It looked barbaric, but Master Feng insisted the wings needed to be immobilized during the process. I understand, Aldrich said. His voice was steady, but his claws dug into the cushions beneath him. Master Foam administered the first injection directly into the base of Aldrich's left wing. The prince hissed in pain, but held still. Then the right wing received the same treatment. Clear liquid from the syringe disappeared into dragon flesh. "What is that stuff?" Roy asked. "A catalyst derived from regenerative plants that grow only in the deep mountains. It forces the body's healing systems into overdrive. Bones that would take months to heal will regenerate in days. But the process is violent. Every nerve ending will scream." Master Foam put away the syringe. "Now we wait." The first hour was quiet. Aldrich seemed fine, almost disappointed that nothing was happening. Roy and Diana took turns keeping watch while Master Foam meditated in a corner, conserving his energy for the long week ahead. Then Aldrich's breathing changed. Became faster, shallower. Sweat beaded on his scales. "It's starting," Master Foam said without opening his eyes. That'd be why the second hour. Aldrich was shaking. He bit down on a leather strap Diana provided, trying not to scream. His wings trembled in their restraints as bones began to shift beneath the skin. Roy moved to sit beside him. "I'm here, not going anywhere." Aldrich's eyes locked onto Roy's face like it was the only anchor in a sea of pain. He couldn't speak around the leather strap, but his expression said everything. The first night was worse than anything Roy had witnessed in the mines. Aldrich's screams echoed through the forgotten wing despite their attempts to muffle the sound. His body convulsed as bones broke and reformed. Diana administered pain medication when she could, but Master Foam warned against too much. The body needed to feel the process to guide the healing correctly. Roy stayed awake through all. When Aldrich's claws tore into the cushions, Roy held his hand, letting the dragon grip tight enough to draw blood from his palm. When the screaming stopped and Aldrich whimpered like a wounded child, Roy spoke quietly about meaningless things. Stories from the mines. Jokes that weren't funny. Anything to prove someone was still there. Diana and Master Foam rotated shifts, but Roy refused to leave. He sat beside Aldrich hour after hour, day after day. He barely ate, barely slept, just maintained his presence like a promise made solid. On the third day, other humans from the palace began arriving. Word had spread through the worker community about what Roy was attempting. A maintenance worker named Carl brought blankets. A laundry worker named Beth brought clean sheets. A gardener named Simon brought fresh water from a private well. "We heard you could use help," Carl said simply. They established a rotation. Humans who had never met Aldrich took shifts sitting with him, providing support while Roy caught brief moments of sleep. The dragon was barely conscious by this point, lost in a fever dream of agony. But whenever he surfaced, a human face was there. Someone who cared. Diana organized the effort like a military operation. She scheduled shifts, managed supplies, and kept detailed medical notes. Master Foam was impressed by her efficiency and began teaching her dragon physiology so she could help with treatments. On the fourth day, Crown Prince Vulcan learned what was happening. He sent guards to the East Wing to stop the treatment. They found 20 humans blocking the library entrance. Carl, the maintenance worker, stood at the front of the group. "You will move aside," the guard captain ordered. "No, sir, we won't," Carl replied calmly. "This is treason, interference with imperial family matters. This is helping someone who needs it. Last time I checked, that wasn't illegal." Carl crossed his arms. "You won't get past us, you'll have to arrest all of us." Might be hard to run a palace with no maintenance staff, no kitchen workers, no cleaners. The guards retreated to report to Vulcan. The Crown Prince was furious, but could not act openly without admitting he wanted his brother to fail. 2D. He settled for placing restrictions on human workers instead, making their jobs harder, hoping they would give up. They did not give up. On the fifth day, Aldrich stopped screaming. He lay silent and pale, barely breathing. Master Foam checked his vital signs and shook his head. This is the crisis point. Either his body accepts the treatment and he survives, or it rejects everything and he dies. We can only wait. Roy refused to accept waiting. He leaned close to Aldrich's ear and began talking. Not about comforting things this time. He talked about the future, about flying again, about proving everyone wrong. about all the things Aldrich would do once he recovered. "You don't get to quit now," Roy said firmly. "I didn't spend a week watching you suffer, just so you could give up at the end. You're stronger than this. Stronger than the pain. Stronger than your brother. Stronger than everyone who said you were finished. So you fight. You hear me? You fight." Diana added her own voice. Then Carl. Then Beth and Simon and all the other humans who had been helping. They formed a chorus of encouragement, a wall of sound that pulled Aldrich back from the darkness that on the sixth day, Aldrich's eyes opened. He was weak, barely able to move, but alive. The fever had broken. His wings, still restrained in the frame, had stopped trembling. The bones had set in their new positions. "Water," Aldrich croaked. Diana nearly cried with relief as she helped him drink. Master Feng examined the wings carefully, checking bone alignment and tissue regeneration. His old face split into a rare smile. It worked. The treatment worked. One more day of monitoring, and we can begin rehabilitation. Roy, who had not slept properly in nearly a week, finally allowed himself to collapse into an exhausted sleep. Carl and Beth carried him to a corner and covered him with blankets. He had earned his rest that on the seventh day, Master Feng removed the restraints from Aldrich's wings. The prince slowly folded them against his back. There was still pain, still stiffness, but the bones were whole. The membranes had regenerated. Scars remained, but they were battle scars now, proof of survival rather than symbols of defeat. "How do they feel?" Diana asked. Aldrich carefully extended one wing, then the other. They responded smoothly, without the grinding resistance that had plagued him before. He spread them fully, feeling the air catch in the membranes. "Like they're mine again," he said quietly. High in his tower, Emperor Sethian watched his son spread wings that should have remained broken forever. Watched the humans celebrate a victory that should have been impossible. The emperor stood from his throne and walked to the window. Looking down at the palace below, something fundamental had changed. He could feel it in the air, see it in the way humans and dragons looked at each other in the courtyards. The rigid hierarchy that had governed his empire for centuries was beginning to crack. Sethian did not know if this was progress or catastrophe, but he knew he could no longer simply watch. It was time to act, time to test whether this human's influence would save his empire or destroy it. He summoned his herald and began composing a challenge that would force everyone to choose sides. The imperial summons arrived 3 days after Aldrich completed his treatment. A herald in formal robes appeared at the library entrance, flanked by palace guards. He unrolled a scroll and began reading in a voice that carried through the halls. "By decree of Emperor Sethian, seventh son Prince Aldrich is hereby challenged to demonstrate his worthiness to return to the imperial family. He shall fly from the courtyard floor to the peak of the central spire without pause or assistance. He has 3 moon cycles to prepare. Success will restore his full status and title. Failure will result in permanent exile to the outer colonies." The scroll was sealed with the emperor's personal mark. There was no refusing it. No negotiating. Aldrich stared at the document like it was a death sentence. 300 meters, he said after the herald left. "The central spire is 300 meters tall. How far can you fly now?" Roy asked. "I don't know. 20 meters before my wings tire? Maybe 30. Aldrich paced the library, his newly healed wings dragging behind him. The treatment healed the structure, but the muscles are weak. 3 moon cycles is not enough time to build that kind of endurance. Diana checked her calendar. 3 moon cycles gives us about 80 days. That's a lot of training time. For a human, perhaps. Dragon wings require years to develop proper strength after this kind of injury. Aldrich sat heavily. My father knows this. He has given me false hope before final exile. Roy said nothing for a long moment. He walked to the window and looked out at the central spire. It gleamed in the afternoon sun, impossibly tall and straight. A monument to dragon power and pride. Then we better start training today, Roy said. No time to waste feeling sorry for ourselves. Over the next week, they converted a large empty hall near the library into a training space. Roy designed a progressive system using his mining engineering knowledge. Weights and pulleys to simulate flight resistance. platforms at various heights to practice takeoffs and landings. Even a large fan borrowed from the maintenance department to create wind resistance. The human worker community rallied again. Carl and his crew built the training equipment. Beth organized scheduling so Aldrich could train during hours when nobles were unlikely to wander near. Simon created a private garden space where Aldrich could practice outdoor flights without being seen. Aldrich trained every day. Short flights at first, barely making it across the hall before exhaustion hit. Roy pushed him to continue even when every muscle screamed. Diana monitored his nutrition and recovery, adjusting meals to maximize muscle development. Master Phone taught breathing techniques to increase stamina. Progress was slow. After 2 weeks, Aldrich could fly 50 meters. After 4 weeks, 100 meters. But the gains were getting harder. His wings grew stronger, but the central spire remained impossibly far above them. "I'm not going to make it," Aldrich said one evening after a particularly difficult training session. He lay on the floor, wings spread out, breathing hard. "The math doesn't work. My improvement rate won't get me to 300 meters in time." Roy sat beside him. "Math doesn't account for everything. Humans break mathematical predictions all the time. We call it determination. Determination doesn't change physics." "No, but it changes what you're willing to endure to overcome physics." Roy handed Aldrich a water bottle. "Besides, we have something your father didn't account for." "What's that?" "Innovation." Roy pulled out a notebook filled with sketches. "I've been thinking about the problem wrong. We don't need to make you strong enough to fly 300 meters. We need to make the flight easier." He showed Aldrich the drawings. They depicted the central spire with wind patterns marked at different heights. Thermal updrafts, pressure zones, places where the tower itself created artificial currents. The spire isn't just an obstacle. It's a tool. If you use these air patterns correctly, you can ride them upward. Let the wind do half the work. Roy pointed to specific areas. "Here and here. These spots will give you lift. You'll need to spiral rather than fly straight up, but it cuts the actual wing work by nearly 40%. Aldrich studied the drawings. "How did you figure this out?" "Watchbirds. Talked to some human pilots who work the cargo ships. Asked a lot of questions." Roy grinned. "Turns out humans have spent a lot of time studying flight, since we can't do it naturally. We had to get creative." They adjusted the training program to focus on spiral flight patterns and using air currents. Aldrich practiced in the outdoor garden space, learning to feel the wind and trust it to carry him. It was counterintuitive for a dragon, whose instinct was to power through obstacles, but gradually Aldrich adapted 0.6 weeks before the challenge. Crown Prince Vulcan made his move. Aldrich's food was poisoned. Not enough to kill, but enough to make him violently ill. Diana discovered the contamination when she noticed the smell was off. Master Foam identified the toxin and treated it, but Aldrich lost 4 days of training to fever and weakness. "Your brother is scared," Roy said as Aldrich recovered. "He wouldn't sabotage you if he thought you'd fail on your own. He's smart to be scared. If I succeed, I become a threat to his position." Aldrich coughed, his throat still raw from the poison. "This won't be his last attempt." Roy stood and walked to the door. "Then we make sure you succeed anyway." Despite him, despite the poison, despite everything, the human workers increased security around Aldrich. They set up rotating watches, checked all food before it reached him, and created redundant supply chains. Carl personally inspected the training equipment each morning for sabotage. The human community had invested too much to let Vulcan's scheme succeed. With 2 weeks remaining before the challenge, Aldrich managed to fly to 150 meters following the spiral pattern Roy designed. Halfway to the goal. Close enough to imagine success, but far enough to doubt it. "We're running out of time," Aldrich said. Then we train harder. Roy set up a new exercise. Midnight sessions. 3 hours before dawn. "Your wings are freshest then. We'll add an extra training block." "That's not sustainable. I'll burn out." "Maybe. Or maybe you'll surprise yourself." Roy met his eyes. "Trust me. Trust the work we've done. Trust that sometimes impossible just means nobody's tried hard enough yet." The final 2 weeks were brutal. Aldrich trained until he collapsed, recovered, and trained again. His wings grew stronger through sheer repetition and stubborn refusal to quit. Diana's meals became more sophisticated, targeting specific muscle groups. Master Fong used ancient techniques to speed recovery between sessions. The human workers began their own ritual. Every morning before training, they would gather in the garden and sing the old mining work song, the same one Roy sang to his daughter in the mines. The rhythm helped Aldrich pace his wing beats, gave him something to focus on besides the pain that on the night before the challenge, Aldrich couldn't sleep. He paced the library while Roy sat quietly nearby. "What if I fail?" Aldrich asked. "What happens to everyone who helped me?" "To you. We deal with it." Roy didn't sugarcoat the answer. "But you're not going to fail. You can't know that." "No, I can't. But I believe it anyway." Roy stood and faced Aldrich. "You've already done the impossible. You healed wings that should have stayed broken. You survived a treatment that kills most people who attempt it. You learned to fly again when everyone said it was over. One more impossible thing won't be any different." Aldrich wanted to believe him, wanted to have that same unshakable faith. "Why do you believe in me so much?" "Because somebody has to, and because you're worth believing in." Roy put a hand on Aldrich's shoulder. "Now get some sleep. Tomorrow you're going to fly higher than you've ever flown before. I want to see the look on your father's face when you do it." In his tower, Emperor Sethian prepared for the challenge. He had watched Aldrich's training through the observation crystals, watched the humans rally around his son, watched impossible become possible through nothing more than determination and cooperation. Tomorrow would decide many things. Whether his son could truly fly again, whether the old ways still serve the empire, whether a simple janitor's faith could reshape centuries of tradition. Sethian looked at his reflection in the polished throne and wondered which outcome he truly wanted. Dawn broke over the imperial palace with unusual silence. Every courtier, every servant, every noble who could arrange attendance gathered in the central courtyard. Word of the challenge had spread beyond the palace walls. Humans from the capital city lined the outer gates, hoping for a glimpse of what would happen. The central spire rose before them, 300 meters of carved stone and crystal that had stood for 1,000 years. It represented everything the Dragon Empire valued. Height, power, permanence. At its peak, a golden platform gleamed in the early morning light. Aldrich stood at the base, his wings folded against his back. He wore simple clothes, nothing ceremonial. Roy stood beside him, along with Diana, Master Fong, Carl, Beth, Simon, and dozens of other humans who had helped during the long months of recovery and training. Emperor Scythian descended from his tower for the first time in a decade. His massive form settled onto a raised platform where he could observe clearly. The entire court held its breath. The emperor attending personally meant this challenge carried more weight than anyone had realized. Crown Prince Vulcan stood among the nobles, his expression carefully neutral, but his claws tapped against the stone railing in a nervous rhythm. The herald stepped forward and read the terms of the challenge again. His voice echoed across the courtyard. When he finished, he gestured to Aldrich. "The challenge may begin whenever the prince is ready." Aldrich looked at Roy. The human nodded once, a simple gesture of confidence. Aldrich took a deep breath and spread his wings. They unfurled smoothly, fully healed, stronger than they had been before the injury. Sunlight caught the membranes, making them glow. A murmur ran through the crowd. Many had never seen Aldrich's wings healed. They had believed the rumors that he would remain broken forever. Aldrich crouched and launched himself upward. His wings beat powerfully, carrying him 20 meters up in the first surge. The crowd gasped. He had already proven he could fly, which was more than most had expected. But 20 meters was not 300 that Aldrich shifted into the spiral pattern Roy had designed. Instead of fighting straight up against gravity, he circled the spire, using the wind currents created by the tower's shape. At 50 meters, he caught the first thermal updraft. It lifted him faster with less effort. The humans in the courtyard began to chant. The mining works song, its rhythm steady and strong. The sound carried upward, giving Aldrich something to pace his wing beats against it. At T100 meters, his muscles began to burn. The poison for Vulcan's attempt had weakened him more than he wanted to admit. His wings trembled slightly, but he pushed through it, trusting the training. Trusting Roy's calculations about the wind patterns that a T 150 meters, doubt crept in. His vision blurred from the exertion. The platform at the top seemed impossibly far away. Every wing beat required conscious effort now. His body screamed at him to stop, to descend, to accept that this was as high as he could go. Then he heard Roy's voice cutting through the chanting. Not shouting advice or encouragement. Just 3 words. You're not done. Something in those words steadied Aldrich. Roy had watched him suffer through 7 days of agony, had sat beside him when everyone else walked away, had built equipment with his own hands, designed training programs, calculated wind patterns, and refused to accept failure at every single step. Roy believed that had to count for something. Aldrich caught another thermal at 170 meters. This one was stronger, created by the spire's peak deflecting wind downward. He rode it upward in a tight spiral, saving his strength for the final push. At 200 meters, he could see the details of the golden platform. At 250, he could count the support pillars. The crowd below had gone completely silent. Even the human chanting had stopped. Everyone watched as the disgraced prince climbed higher than anyone thought possible. At 270 meters, Aldrich's left wing cramped. Pain shot through the muscle, threatening to fold the wing entirely. For a terrible moment, he faltered, dropping several meters before he recovered. The crowd gasped. Roy started the mining chant again, louder this time. The other humans joined in immediately. The sound rolled across the courtyard and up the spire like a wave of sound. Aldrich synchronized his wing beats to the rhythm. The cramp eased slightly. Not gone, but manageable. He pushed upward. 280 meters. 290. The platform was right there. Just 10 more meters. His wings were done. Completely exhausted. He had nothing left to give. But quitting now, this close, would mean everything had been for nothing. All the pain, all the work, all the people who believed in him would be proven wrong. Aldrich thought about his father watching from below, about Vulcan hoping for failure, about Master Fong risking his reputation, about Diana smuggling food and Carl building equipment, and all the humans who treated him like he was worth saving. He thought about Roy sitting beside him through the darkest nights, holding his hand while bones broke and reformed, refusing to abandon him even when it would have been easier. Aldrich beat his wings one more time. Then again. Then one final, desperate surge that sent pain through every muscle and nerve. His claws touched the golden platform. He collapsed onto it, wings spread out, breathing in ragged gasps. But he was there, at the top. He had done it. The courtyard erupted. Omans charat wildly. Even some dragons couldn't help but show approval, their roars mixing with the human celebration. Roy stood with his hands clasped together, not cheering, but smiling with quiet satisfaction. Emperor Sethian rose from his platform. He spread his own massive wings and flew up to the spire peak in a single powerful surge. He landed beside Aldrich, looking down at his 7th son who lay exhausted but victorious. Stand, Sethian commanded. Aldrich struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. His wings trembled from exhaustion, but he held them open, refusing to show more weakness than necessary. Sethian studied him for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice carried down to the courtyard through magic that amplified it for all to hear. I have ruled this empire for 3 centuries. I have followed the old ways because they brought us strength and stability. I believe that weakness had no place in the dragon bloodline, that those who could not maintain perfection should be cast aside. He paused. I was wrong. The court gasped. The emperor admitting error was unheard of. This is not a story of a dragon prince who recovered. This is a story of a human janitor who saw someone suffering and chose to help for no reason except that it was right. Sethian looked down at Roy in the courtyard. The old ways would have let my son die in darkness. Human ways gave him light instead. Sethian turned back to Aldrich. You are restored to your full status as prince of this empire. But more than that, You are appointed as ambassador to human relations. You will work to ensure that the cooperation and compassion you receive becomes standard rather than exception. Aldrich bowed, nearly falling from exhaustion. Sethian caught him with one wing. Rest, my son. You have earned it. As Sethian flew Aldrich back down to the courtyard, palace guards moved through the crowd. They arrested Crown Prince Vulcan on charges of attempted assassination and poisoning. Evidence that had been gathered over months was finally presented publicly. Vulcan's careful plotting had been watched and documented all along. Roy watched the guards take Vulcan away. Justice, finally. But it felt hollow compared to the real victory. Aldrich was alive, healed, flying again. That mattered more than any political outcome. Sethian landed in the courtyard and set Aldrich down near Roy. The Emperor looked at the human janitor directly for the first time. You refused a noble title when I offered it before. You refused lands and wealth. Yet you accomplished something I could not. You saved my son. Sethian's voice was quieter now, meant only for those nearby. What do you want as reward? Roy thought about it. Better conditions for human workers throughout the palace. Fair wages. Representation in palace decisions that affect them. A voice that actually gets heard. Done. What else? Nothing else. That's enough. Sethian stared at him. You are either the wisest human I have ever met or the most foolish. Maybe both. Roy shrugged. I just wanted to help someone who needed it. Everything else is extra. Over the following weeks, changes swept through the palace. Human workers received pay increases and better housing. A council was formed where human representatives could voice concerns directly to dragon leadership. Medical techniques that blended dragon tradition with human innovation were developed and shared. Aldrich took his new role seriously. He met with human communities throughout the capital, listening to their needs and concerns. His reputation grew not as a dragon prince, but as someone who understood suffering and chose to prevent it in others. Master Phone was restored to his position and given funding to research previously forbidden medical techniques. Diana became head of cultural exchange programs, bringing human and dragon perspectives together through the universal language of food. Roy returned to his janitor duties by choice. He was offered promotions repeatedly and turned them all down. He preferred his quiet routes through the palace, checking on forgotten corners and finding people who needed help. Point one evening, Aldrich found Roy in his usual East Wing hallway, pushing his cleaning cart and whistling the old mining song. You know you don't have to do this anymore, Aldrich said. You can have any position in the palace. I know. Roy emptiet avastibin. But someone needs to take care of the places everyone forgets. Besides, I like this work. It's honest. Aldrich walked beside him for a while in comfortable silence. Their friendship had become legendary throughout the empire. Songs were written about it. Stories told to children. The prince and the janitor who proved that worth had nothing to do with birth or status. I never properly thank you, Aldrich said finally, for everything you did, for believing in me when no one else would. You don't need to thank me. Seeing you fly again was thanks enough. Roy smiled. Besides, you do the same for someone else now. That's what matters. Passing it forward. I would, because of what you taught me. Aldrich spread his wings briefly, feeling the air catch in them. These wings work because of you. But more than that, I learned what real strength looks like. It's not about dominating others. It's about lifting them up. Roy nodded. Your father is learning that too. Slowly. But he's learning. They reached the end of the hallway. Aldrich prepared to fly off to his evening duties. But he paused and looked back at Roy. Same time next week? I thought we could have dinner together. Diana is making something special. I'll be there. Roy waved as Aldrich took flight. In his tower, Emperor Sethian watched the exchange through his observation crystals. He no longer watched from judgment, but from curiosity. Every day, he saw new examples of human compassion affecting dragon culture. Every day, the empire changed a little more. The old ways had brought stability, but they had also brought stagnation. These new ways, these human ways, brought chaos sometimes, but they also brought growth, innovation, hope. Sethian turned away from the crystal and looked at his reflection in the polished throne. 300 years of rule, and he was still learning. Still changing. Perhaps that was what real wisdom looked like. Not being perfect, but being willing to admit imperfection and grow beyond it. The emperor smiled, something he had not done in decades. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he welcomed that uncertainty. Because uncertainty meant possibility, and possibility meant hope. Down in the forgotten wing that was no longer forgotten, Roy continued his rounds, whistling as he worked. Just a janitor doing his job. Just a human who saw someone who needed help and chose not to walk away. Just someone who proved that the smallest acts of kindness could reshape empires.